The metallic click of handcuffs snapping shut around my 16-year-old son's wrists is a sound I will never forget. I stood paralyzed in the principal's office as two armed officers shoved his trembling body forward. Right beside them stood my own sister, the powerful PTA president. She wore a mask of manufactured pity, yet her cold eyes locked onto mine with a triumphant smirk. In less than 60 seconds, she had thrown my boy to the wolves. Welcome, dear listeners, and thank you so much for tuning in to Maya Revenge Stories. Unfortunately, YouTube has completely disabled our channel's monetization, leaving us with absolutely no budget to keep our operations running. If you find today's story captivating, please kindly support us by joining our Patreon community, where you can listen to exclusive, incredibly detailed true stories featuring multiple emotional voice actors and extended lengths that we simply cannot publish on YouTube. You can easily join us by scanning the QR code right on your screen or by clicking the Patreon link found in the description or the pinned comment below. Now, let us dive right into today's intense journey, beginning with a 36-year-old mother named Ivy Aguilar. I was right in the middle of a chaotic afternoon shift at the logistics center, surrounded by the deafening roar of forklifts and shouting supervisors, when my cell phone vibrated frantically against my metal clipboard. The caller ID flashed Crestmont Pines High School. My stomach instantly dropped. A phone call from the high school administration in the middle of a Tuesday afternoon was never good news. I answered immediately, my voice tight with sudden anxiety. A school secretary with a flat, emotionless tone simply informed me that I needed to come down to the principal's office right this exact second. When I desperately pressed her for a reason, she absolutely refused to elaborate. She only repeated coldly that it was a highly urgent emergency regarding my 16-year-old son, Leo. I dropped my paperwork, grabbed my car keys, and sprinted out of the warehouse. The drive to the school usually takes a solid 20 minutes in midday traffic, but I made it in under 12. My mind was violently racing through 100 different terrifying scenarios. Was he severely injured? Did he collapse during gym class? Leo was a quiet, gentle, and obedient kid who spent all of his free time in our cramped garage fixing up old car engines. He had never been called into a single disciplinary meeting in his entire life. I slammed my car door shut and practically ran through the main double doors of the administration building, my chest heaving as I gasped for air. Bursting into the principal's office, the sight before me shattered my entire reality. The air completely left my lungs. My sweet, gentle boy was standing dead in the center of the room. His face was drained of all color, completely pale with sheer terror, and his entire body was trembling violently. Flanking him on either side were two massive, fully uniformed police officers. One of them was forcefully twisting Leo's arms behind his back, and the heavy metallic clicks of police handcuffs echoing off the sterile walls felt like gunshots to my heart. "Leo!" I screamed, lunging forward with every ounce of motherly instinct I possessed. But the second police officer immediately held up a stern hand, forcefully blocking my path. My eyes darted around the crowded room frantically, desperately trying to make sense of this sudden nightmare. That was when I saw her, standing just a few feet away, right beside the principal's grand mahogany desk, was Beatrice, my own biological sister. She was the reigning, ultra-powerful president of the Parent-Teacher Association, dressed impeccably in her custom designer suit, her arms casually crossed over her chest. She wore a perfectly crafted mask of deep, agonizing sorrow. Shaking her head slowly as if witnessing a devastating family tragedy. But I knew that face better than anyone else on earth. Beneath the fake, hypocritical concern, her eyes were razor-sharp, glinting with a sickeningly cold, triumphant satisfaction. The officers began to march my terrified, sobbing son toward the office door. Leo looked at me pleadingly, heavy tears streaming down his pale cheeks, his voice completely cracking as he cried out that he did not do anything wrong. I tried to reach for him one more time, but Beatrice smoothly stepped directly into my path, pretending to offer a comforting embrace to hold me back. As the heavy boots of the officers pushed past us with my son in tow, She leaned her perfectly styled head close to my ear. The smell of her expensive, suffocating perfume filled my nose. "Tell him to plead guilty, Ivy," she whispered, her tone dripping with sharp, venomous mockery. "Do not humiliate this family any further, and I will personally ask the police to go easy on him." I shoved her away in absolute disgust, but she simply adjusted her expensive lapel, her fake expression of public pity returning instantly. I stumbled out of the office, following the agonizing procession like a ghost. They paraded my handcuffed boy down the main, brightly lit corridor right as the afternoon bell rang. Hundreds of teenagers flooded the hallway instantly. The cruel whispers erupted like a massive wildfire. Fingers pointed sharply in his direction. Dozens of smartphones were immediately raised high in the air, their camera lenses zooming in on my son's absolute humiliation, recording his lowest, most terrifying moment for the entire town to consume. I stood completely rooted to the linoleum floor, paralyzed by helplessness. My mind finally connected the devastating pieces: the suspicious speed of the arrest, the strict refusal to tell me anything over the phone, Beatrice standing proudly in the office before I even knew there was a problem. This was not a tragic misunderstanding. This was a lightning-fast, perfectly orchestrated trap deliberately designed to silence us, ensuring my son and I never had a single second to open our mouths and defend ourselves. To understand how my sister could so easily toss her own flesh and blood into the jaws of the criminal justice system, you have to clearly understand the sickening, invisible chasm that permanently divided our family. I was a fiercely independent single mother, grinding through grueling 60-hour work weeks as a distribution manager at Vanguard Meridian Logistics. My daily life was strictly defined by glaring neon warehouse lights, endless corporate inventory spreadsheets, and the heavy burden of meticulously stretching every single paycheck just to keep a decent roof over our heads. It was a hard, relentlessly exhausting life, but it was an honest one. I poured absolutely every ounce of my remaining energy and love into creating a warm, deeply supportive sanctuary for my son. Leo was a brilliant, incredibly hardworking kid whose greatest, purest joy was simply burying his grease-stained hands deep into motor oil. He spent all of his weekends patiently rebuilding the transmission of a beat-up, heavily rusted sedan he had purchased entirely with his own lawn-mowing money. On the exact opposite, glittering end of the human decency spectrum sat my older sister, Beatrice. She had proudly married Sterling, a flashy, incredibly loud-mouthed commercial real estate developer whose entire hollow personality was built entirely upon aggressive social networking and heavily leased luxury vehicles. Beatrice was absolutely consumed by the intoxicating, superficial illusion of high society. Her daily, vain existence revolved almost exclusively around elite country club memberships, exclusive charity galas she only ever attended for the local magazine photo opportunities, and aggressively climbing the cutthroat social ladder of our affluent, snobby suburban town, to Beatrice and her pompous husband. My modest, fiercely blue-collar life was not merely an awkward difference in lifestyle. We were the dirty, shameful stain on their pristine, carefully curated public image. She openly despised the fact that her only nephew smelled like honest engine grease instead of expensive, imported cologne. The actual, devastating nightmare had its dark roots planted firmly in the high school's highly publicized, aggressively marketed technology initiative. Just 2 weeks prior to the arrest, Crestmont Pines High School had proudly accepted a massive corporate-sponsored donation of brand-new, cutting-edge educational equipment. We are talking about exactly $50,000 worth of high-end digital tablets, sophisticated virtual reality headsets, and top-tier laptops meant exclusively for the advanced science department. The entire, highly valuable shipment was locked away securely behind the heavy doors of the main audiovisual storage room. It was patiently waiting for a grand televised unveiling ceremony that Beatrice herself was supposed to confidently host as the ultimate, self-congratulatory president of the Parent-Teacher Association. But that glorious ceremony never happened, because sometime over the rainy weekend, the secure storage room was completely cleaned out. Every single expensive piece of equipment vanished into thin air without leaving a single shattered window or forced lock behind. The panic among the wealthy school board members was absolute, furious, and immediate. They demanded rapid answers, and the local police department was swiftly brought in to investigate the massive, humiliating theft. This was exactly the moment when Beatrice recognized her golden, twisted opportunity to execute a flawless, sickeningly perfect trap. As the reigning head of the parent committee, she possessed unprecedented, virtually unrestricted access to both the administration staff and the heavily armed investigating detectives. She seamlessly, masterfully wove herself right into the frantic center of the crisis. She played the flawless role of the deeply concerned, grieving community leader while quietly, strategically steering the entire police investigation aggressively away from the actual truth. She pointed the heavy hand of the law directly at my son. Leo was the easiest, most painfully convenient target imaginable for a desperate scapegoat, because I absolutely could not afford to buy him his own car or fully fund his college tuition on a warehouse supervisor's salary. Leo had proactively taken on a menial part-time job as a janitorial assistant right there at the high school. He diligently mopped the gymnasium floors late at night, emptied the cafeteria trash cans, and most crucially to my sister's evil plan, he possessed a standard master keycard to quickly access the utility closets. Those closets just so happened to be located directly on the exact same isolated hallway as the targeted audiovisual storage room. Beatrice ruthlessly, repeatedly highlighted this circumstantial fact to the authorities. She whispered dark, poisonous suggestions directly into the ears of the gullible principal, expertly framing Leo as a desperate, impoverished teenager from a broken, financially struggling single-parent home who had finally caved to the overwhelming temptation of quick, easy money. But Beatrice, ever the calculating socialite, knew that mere opportunity and a terrible, entirely fabricated motive were not quite enough to secure an immediate, unquestionable arrest. She desperately needed hard, undeniable physical proof to permanently ensure my son would take the catastrophic fall completely, bypassing any lengthy, probing police interrogation. So, she took matters entirely into her own meticulously manicured hands. On the Monday morning, just hours before the brutal arrest, while Leo was completely distracted sitting in his advanced calculus class, Beatrice casually strolled through the crowded student parking lot under the clever guise of conducting a routine campus safety perimeter check. It was right there, entirely unseen, that she quickly slipped a single, freshly stolen corporate iPad right into the unlocked, messy trunk of Leo's rusted automotive project car. She planted the damning evidence with the cold, breathing precision of a seasoned, remorseless criminal. When the heavily armed police inevitably searched his fragile vehicle, following her supposedly anonymous, highly concerned citizen tip, they immediately found the stolen tablet buried perfectly beneath his greasy mechanic rags and heavy steel wrenches. That single, isolated piece of planted electronics was the absolute, undeniable nail in the coffin. It handed the aggressive police officers all the immediate probable cause they needed to completely bypass any further logical questioning and slap the cold steel cuffs directly onto a terrified 16-year-old boy. Beatrice had successfully, mercilessly constructed an inescapable, airtight cage, willfully using her own innocent nephew as the ultimate, disposable shield to completely cover up a much darker, far more sinister financial reality happening right behind her own locked, affluent doors. The first 24 hours after I completely drained every single cent of my meager life savings to secure my son's bail felt like an endless, suffocating descent into a waking nightmare. Handing over those thousands of dollars to a cold, unsympathetic clerk at the county detention center was agonizing, but leaving my child locked inside a freezing concrete cell for even one more minute was simply impossible. The drive back to our small house was utterly silent, thick with a heavy unspoken trauma. By the time the sun dragged itself over the horizon the next morning, our entire community had effectively erected an invisible, impenetrable wall of hostility around our property. The social execution was astonishingly swift and entirely merciless. Neighbors I had warmly greeted for over a decade suddenly averted their eyes and hurried inside when I stepped out onto the porch. My cell phone vibrated relentlessly on the kitchen counter. Flooded with a sickening barrage of hateful text messages and venomous voicemails from the high school parents, they aggressively branded Leo a common thief, a disgraceful criminal, and a dangerous liability to their pristine educational environment. Some even demanded we pack up our belongings and move out of the school district entirely. Inside the house, the atmosphere was even more devastating. Leo had immediately retreated into his small bedroom, locking the door behind him and plunging himself into total darkness. When I finally managed to coax him into letting me inside to bring him a plate of untouched food, the sight of him broke whatever was left of my bleeding heart. He was sitting slumped on the edge of his unmade bed, his eyes completely glassy and vacant, staring blankly at the blank wall. The bright, passionate spark of the hard-working mechanic I knew so well had been violently extinguished. In just one single afternoon, his supposed friends had universally abandoned him, blocking his numbers and publicly denouncing him on every social media platform. His entire future, his college dreams, and his profound sense of basic human justice had been utterly obliterated. The crippling silence of our isolated home was suddenly shattered late that evening by the shrill ringing of my phone. The caller ID glowed with Beatrice's name in the dim kitchen light. A surge of pure physical nausea washed over me, but a primal instinct forced me to swipe the screen and press the device to my ear. I did not say a word. "Ivy, I know things look incredibly bleak right now, but you need to listen to me carefully," Beatrice began. Her voice lacked any trace of the fake public pity she had displayed at the principal's office. Instead, it was smooth, businesslike, and chillingly transactional. "The school board is pushing for maximum penalties, and the district attorney is eager to make a harsh example out of him. He is looking at real, hard time in a juvenile facility." My grip on the phone tightened until my knuckles turned completely white, but I forced my jaw to remain clamped shut. "However," she continued, taking a slow, calculated breath, "I have significant influence with the board, and Sterling plays golf with the lead prosecutor. I can pull the right strings. I can get the felony charges drastically reduced. I can absolutely guarantee Leo walks away with just a few months of light, unsupervised probation and a sealed record. He gets his life back." "What do you want, Beatrice?" I asked, my voice reduced to a raspy, trembling whisper. I knew her twisted soul too well to believe this was a sudden act of sisterly mercy. "It is very simple," she replied smoothly, her tone sharpening into a deadly blade. "You are going to sign over your 50% share of the undeveloped waterfront acreage Mom and Dad left us in their trust. Sterling needs that land immediately for a new commercial zoning project, and you have been stubbornly sitting on your half for years. You sign the legal transfer documents by Friday morning, relinquishing all your inherited rights, and I will personally ensure your precious boy does not spend another single second in handcuffs. Think of it as paying for a highly exclusive legal defense. Do we have a deal?" The call ended with a sharp click. I stood frozen in the center of my dark, quiet kitchen, the phone still pressed tightly against my cheek. Suddenly, the suffocating fog of despair that had choked me for the past 24 hours violently evaporated. The disconnected puzzle pieces slammed violently into place. The missing technology equipment, the suspiciously quick police intervention, the perfectly planted evidence, and now, the ultimate demand for a multi-million-dollar piece of prime real estate. Putting my innocent teenager behind bars was never just an act of petty snobbery. It was a highly calculated, ruthless financial strike. Beatrice and her husband were actively using the crushing weight of the criminal justice system to violently extort me, intending to steal my rightful inheritance while permanently destroying my son as collateral damage. The profound, paralyzing grief I felt for Leo's ruined reputation instantly ignited into something entirely different. A raw, blinding, volcanic fury erupted from the deepest pit of my stomach. They had crossed the most sacred line in existence. They had targeted my child. I slammed the phone face down onto the counter. I wiped the drying tears violently from my cheeks and marched straight down the narrow hallway to Leo's bedroom. I pushed the door open and stepped inside, refusing to let the heavy darkness swallow us anymore. I walked directly over to my son, sat firmly beside him on the mattress, and wrapped my arms fiercely around his trembling shoulders, pulling him tight against my chest. "I know you did not do this," I said, my voice steady, vibrating with an absolute, unyielding conviction that cut straight through his shock. "I know exactly who did, and we are absolutely not going to let these monsters crush us. Look at me, Leo." He slowly lifted his tear-stained face, his red, exhausted eyes finally meeting mine in the shadows. "They picked the wrong family to mess with," I stated firmly, squeezing his shoulders. "Now, I need you to think harder than you have ever thought in your entire 16 years of life. Tell me every single thing you did, everywhere you walked, and everything you touched on the exact night that equipment went missing." Leo sat in total silence for a long time, his swollen eyes fixed firmly on the worn carpet of his dark bedroom. The gears in his brilliant, mechanical mind were finally turning again, fighting through the thick fog of his trauma. Then, he suddenly looked up, his breath catching sharply in his throat. "Mom," he whispered, his voice trembling with a sudden, desperate realization. "The parking lot, on the night of the robbery." I parked my car around the back of the main building, right next to the old gymnasium loading dock. I was under the chassis welding a patched exhaust pipe until almost midnight. I nodded slowly, trying to follow his train of thought. "I know, sweetheart. The police said the thieves used that exact dock door because the school's external security camera on that corner has been broken for over 6 months. It is a complete blind spot." "It is a blind spot for the school," Leo corrected me, his eyes widening with a frantic, brilliant spark of hope. "But early last week, I hardwired a cheap, aftermarket dashboard camera into my car battery. It has an active parking sentry mode. If anything moves within 20 feet of my windshield, the motion sensor wakes up and records directly to a hidden memory card." My heart slammed violently against my ribs. The police had completely ransacked his trunk to find the planted tablet, but in their aggressive rush to close the case, they had paid absolutely no attention to the messy, wire-tangled dashboard of a teenager's junk car. We practically sprinted out of the house to the driveway where his rusted sedan sat parked. Leo's hands shook uncontrollably as he popped the plastic casing off the windshield mount and extracted the tiny, fingernail-sized memory card. We spent the entire night huddled together at the small kitchen table, illuminated only by the harsh, bluish glow of my old laptop screen. We meticulously scrubbed through dozens of mundane video files, stray neighborhood cats walking by, the wind blowing empty plastic cups across the cracked asphalt. Then, the digital timestamp on the bottom corner of the video player ticked to exactly 2 o'clock in the morning. The screen flickered, the infrared sensor activated, washing the video heavily in a ghostly, monochromatic green light. A vehicle slowly backed into the frame. It was not a generic, unmarked delivery van. It was a massive, late-model luxury SUV. I leaned in, my face merely inches from the monitor. Using a basic, free video editing software I quickly downloaded from the internet, I paused the specific frame and aggressively tweaked the brightness and contrast sliders. Slowly, the heavily shadowed license plate came into sharp, undeniable focus. I knew that customized vanity plate. I had seen it aggressively tailgating people on the highway 100 times. The driver's side door swung open, and a man stepped out into the chilly night air. He walked directly toward the school's loading dock doors. When he turned back around, carrying 2 massive, incredibly heavy cardboard boxes stamped with highly sensitive electronics warning labels, the infrared light caught his face perfectly. It was Sterling, my wealthy, arrogant, custom suit-wearing brother-in-law, was sweating profusely in a dark hoodie, personally loading $50,000 worth of stolen school equipment into the back of his expensive leather-lined vehicle. A cold, incredibly dangerous calm instantly washed over my entire body. Knowing who did it was simply not enough. I needed to utterly destroy their entire operation. I needed the undeniable paper trail. I am not a trained police detective, but I am a senior distribution manager at Vanguard Meridian Logistics. I have spent over a decade breathing complex supply chain data, tracking massive corporate shipments, and locating missing commercial inventory across the entire country. I know exactly how commercial electronics are secured and monitored. I immediately opened a secure, encrypted portal to my corporate logistics database. I knew the specific technology vendor that had sponsored the high school's donation because our company handled their regional freight routing. By cross-referencing the public school board announcements with our internal shipping manifests, it took me less than 45 minutes to locate the exact master tracking file for the stolen pallets. Every single tablet, laptop, and virtual reality headset in that stolen shipment possessed a unique, hard-coded serial number and an active internal radio frequency identification tag. The thieves thought they were incredibly clever by keeping the devices powered off. But commercial corporate tracking does not require a local wireless internet connection to register a physical location. I pinged the global distribution registry for the entire serial batch. The results populated on my screen in a massive, cascading wave of digital red markers. The equipment was not sitting in a local storage facility. The items were actively being fenced. They were scattered across dozens of shady, low-tier pawn shops and untraceable electronic resale kiosks located entirely in the neighboring state. I did not stop there. I needed to find out exactly where the dirty money was flowing. Using the pawn shop registration codes, I pulled directly from the tracking database. I accessed a series of public commerce and taxation records. Every licensed pawnbroker has to register the payee for bulk commercial purchases to prevent money laundering. I traced the outgoing financial wire transfers. Hundreds of individual small-dollar transactions were all funneling rapidly into a single, highly obscure corporate bank account. The receiving entity was a registered limited liability company. It was a classic, poorly hidden shell corporation. I pulled the state tax registry for the company name, my tired eyes scanning the heavy legal documents until I found the single, glaring mistake they had arrogantly made. The original registration document listed a primary managing director to receive official tax documents. The name printed on the official state document was Beatrice's maiden name, utilizing Sterling's downtown commercial office building as the primary mailing address. Suddenly, the entire, sickening picture snapped into perfect, devastating clarity. I opened another browser tab and ran a deep financial background search on Sterling's commercial real estate firm. The financial forums and local business court filings told a massive, catastrophic story. Sterling was completely bankrupt. His massive, over-leveraged commercial investments had violently collapsed over the past 8 months. They were drowning in a suffocating, inescapable ocean of aggressive, high-interest corporate debt. Their elite country club lifestyle, the imported luxury cars, the custom designer clothes, it was all a crumbling, hollow facade funded entirely by millions of dollars in credit they could no longer pay back. They orchestrated the school robbery for a quick injection of untraceable cash to hold off their angry creditors, but even that was not enough to save them. That was precisely why Beatrice had coldly offered to trade Leo's freedom for my 50% share of our parents' incredibly valuable waterfront land. They desperately needed my inheritance to liquidate immediately and save themselves from total financial ruin. They were fully willing to completely destroy a 16-year-old boy's life, lock him in a concrete cage, and brand him a criminal forever, just to maintain their fake, wealthy image for a few more months. I sat back in my chair as the morning sun slowly began to filter through the kitchen blinds, painting the room in a pale, golden light. The deep exhaustion in my bones was completely gone, replaced entirely by a lethal, razor-sharp focus. I looked over at Leo, who was staring in absolute shock at the undeniable proof glowing brightly on the laptop screen. I reached out and gently squeezed his cold hand. The trap they had built for us was incredibly vicious, but they had made one fatal, unforgivable mistake. They had left a massive digital trail of financial breadcrumbs, and they had arrogantly forced a seasoned logistics expert to come hunting for them. By the morning of the third day, I had successfully weaponized my fury. I did not go directly back to the police station. Instead, I drove straight to the sleek, glass-paneled downtown office of Arthur Vance, a notoriously ruthless civil litigation attorney who was universally feared across the entire county for his merciless, scorched-earth courtroom tactics. I firmly slapped my meticulously compiled dossier of digital evidence down onto his massive mahogany desk. It took him exactly 15 minutes to thoroughly review the electronic tracking codes, the offshore financial wire transfers, and the infrared dashboard video. When he finally looked up at me, a highly predatory, terrifyingly cold smile stretched across his face. We immediately demanded an emergency. Closed-door meeting at the high school administration building. We walked into the grand conference room at exactly 10 o'clock in the morning. The heavy tension in the air was so thick, you could practically choke on it. The high school principal sat nervously at the head of the polished oak table, looking deeply uncomfortable and highly impatient. To his right sat the local chief of police, a stern, heavily decorated man who had personally overseen the brutal arrest of my son, and seated comfortably on the left, radiating a sickening aura of absolute, untouchable invincibility, were my sister and her husband. Beatrice was wearing a pristine white designer blouse, her posture perfectly straight, sipping lightly from a porcelain coffee cup. Sterling sat closely beside her, checking his expensive gold watch with an exaggerated sigh of profound boredom. As soon as I took my seat, Beatrice offered me a deeply patronizing, sympathetic smile that made my stomach violently churn. She reached gracefully into her expensive leather handbag and smoothly slid a thick, legally binding document entirely across the polished table until it rested directly in front of my folded hands. It was the absolute deed of transfer for our parents' waterfront estate, heavily stipulating that I surrender my entire 50% ownership immediately. Beatrice leaned forward, her voice dripping with artificial, sisterly concern. "We just want this terrible nightmare to be completely over for everyone. Ivy," she purred softly, glancing knowingly at the police chief to ensure he witnessed her supposed incredible mercy. "Just sign the paperwork right now. I have already spoken at length with the authorities. Once you sign, we will officially decline to press any further administrative charges on behalf of the school board, and the chief here is willing to recommend a highly lenient probationary period for your boy. Do the right, sensible thing for your family. End this before his entire life is permanently ruined." Sterling chimed in loudly, crossing his arms arrogantly over his broad chest. "Do not be incredibly stubborn, Ivy. You are entirely out of options. Take the lifeline." I did not even bother to look down at the fraudulent contract. I simply leaned back into my chair and turned my eyes silently toward my attorney. Arthur Vance did not utter a single, solitary word. He stood up with the chilling, calculated grace of a seasoned executioner. He smoothly unzipped his sleek leather briefcase, extracted my battered old laptop, and calmly walked over to the center of the large conference table. With a sharp, decisive click, he plugged the thick video cable directly into the room's high-definition overhead projector system. The massive motorized projector screen slowly rolled down from the ceiling directly behind the principal. The room was suddenly plunged into partial darkness. A grainy, monochromatic green video immediately flickered to life on the massive screen. The digital timestamp glowed brightly at the bottom corner, reading exactly 2 o'clock in the morning. The entire room fell completely, deadly silent. Beatrice frowned deeply, her perfect posture stiffening slightly. The police chief leaned heavily forward, his brow furrowing in deep, professional confusion. Then, the massive luxury vehicle slowly backed into the frame. The driver stepped out into the night. I watched Beatrice's face with absolute, unblinking focus as her husband's unmistakable, high-definition face suddenly filled the 10-foot screen. There was Sterling, sweating profusely in the cool air, desperately lugging the massive, heavily marked boxes of stolen school technology directly out of the loading dock and shoving them hastily into his trunk. Before anyone in the room could even take a single breath to process the catastrophic visual evidence, Arthur Vance violently slammed a massive stack of printed financial documents directly onto the center of the oak table. The heavy thud echoed through the silent room like a physical cannon blast. "What you are currently looking at," Vance finally spoke, his deep, booming voice cutting through the immense shock like a sharpened razor blade, "is indisputable, hard-coded corporate supply chain tracking data. We have precisely mapped the individual serial numbers of the stolen educational equipment directly to 17 different pawn shops located entirely across state lines. And these," he pointed sharply at the thick stack of papers, "are the certified banking records proving beyond a shadow of a doubt that every single dollar from those illegal sales was wired directly into a fraudulent shell corporation entirely registered under the maiden name of your beloved Parent-Teacher Association president." The reaction was instantaneous and violently chaotic. The high school principal gasped incredibly loudly, his face draining of all color as he stared blindly at the financial records in absolute horror. The chief of police shot up from his leather chair so incredibly fast that it violently tipped backward and crashed loudly into the wall. His hand instinctively dropped toward his heavy utility belt as his furious, burning eyes locked entirely onto Sterling. Sterling completely collapsed back into his seat. All the arrogant, wealthy color had violently drained from his face, leaving him looking like a sick, terrified ghost. He began gasping heavily for air, clutching his chest tightly, as if his heart were physically failing him right there in the chair. But it was Beatrice who provided me with the ultimate, deeply intoxicating satisfaction. Her previously flawless, arrogant mask had completely shattered into a million irreparable pieces. Her perfectly powdered face turned an ashen, sickly white. Her mouth opened and closed repeatedly, trembling uncontrollably like a suffocating fish. But her completely paralyzed throat could not produce a single, coherent sound. The absolute, unshakable terror of total social and financial ruin violently seized her entire body. The chief of police practically ripped the financial documents out of my lawyer's hands, his intense eyes scanning the highlighted bank transfers with a furious, burning intensity. He immediately grabbed his radio microphone from his shoulder and barked a rapid, highly aggressive series of orders to his dispatch officers. He then turned directly toward me, his stern face filled with a heavy, profound embarrassment and undeniable, deep regret. He looked me dead in the eyes and stated firmly that all pending criminal charges against my son were officially, permanently dropped, effective immediately, in exactly 3 agonizing days. The vicious, suffocating trap they had built to utterly destroy my boy had been completely obliterated. Leo was entirely, officially cleared. The moment the police chief officially declared my son's absolute innocence, a desperate, suffocating silence fell over the wealthy school officials. The principal nervously cleared his throat, his face pale and sweating profusely. As he suddenly attempted to backtrack, he leaned across the polished oak table and offered a trembling, incredibly pathetic apology. He desperately suggested that we could resolve this entire unfortunate misunderstanding privately, keeping everything strictly internal to save face and protect the high school's prestigious, carefully curated public reputation. I slowly stood up from my leather chair and looked dead into his terrified eyes. "You dragged my completely innocent son out of this exact room using heavy steel handcuffs," I stated, my voice echoing off the cold walls with absolutely zero mercy. "So no, we are not keeping this quiet. I am going to drag every single one of you out into the unforgiving light of a federal courtroom." I did not hesitate for a single second. Within exactly 24 hours, my ruthless attorney officially filed a massive multi-million-dollar civil lawsuit against the high school administration, the local police department, and my sister's fraudulent shell corporation. But I knew the legal justice system would take many months to fully process their destruction. I wanted their punishment to be instantaneous. I wanted them to intimately feel the exact same violent, public social execution they had gleefully inflicted upon my teenager. So, I took the entire, unredacted digital dossier, including the incredibly damning infrared video of Sterling carrying the stolen boxes. and I handed it directly to the lead investigative journalist at our largest local television broadcasting network. The absolute storm hit our wealthy suburban town exactly at 6 o'clock that evening. The evening news ran a blistering, front-page exposé, broadcasting Sterling's crystal-clear face and exposing their entire pathetic money laundering scheme to hundreds of thousands of viewers. The immediate fallout was completely apocalyptic. Before the nightly broadcast even concluded, two heavily armed police cruisers aggressively pulled into their long, perfectly manicured driveway. Neighbors rushed out to their expensive front lawns just in time to watch Sterling being violently shoved into the back of a squad car, weeping openly as he was officially arrested for grand larceny, corporate fraud, and filing false police reports. Beatrice's pristine, glittering social empire evaporated over the course of a single night. The high school board held an emergency late-night session and immediately stripped her of her presidency, permanently banning her from the campus grounds. By the following morning, her elite country club had formally revoked her exclusive membership. The affluent, wealthy friends she had spent years desperately trying to impress universally blocked her phone number and treated her like a highly contagious disease. The absolute climax of this entire nightmare arrived late the next evening, surrounded by a freezing torrential downpour. I was sitting comfortably in our warm living room when a weak, frantic knocking rattled our front door. I unlocked the deadbolt and pulled the door open. Standing there on my wet concrete porch was the totally shattered remains of my older sister. Beatrice was completely drenched in the freezing rain. Her highly expensive designer coat was muddy and ruined. Her incredibly costly cosmetics had violently melted, running down her pale cheeks in thick, dark, ugly streaks. The moment she saw my face, her legs completely gave out. She collapsed heavily to her knees on the hard, soaking wet porch, clutching her hands to her chest as she let out a loud, pathetic, agonizing wail. She begged me through heavy, choking sobs to call off the ruthless civil lawyers. She screamed that the bank was actively foreclosing on their massive mansion, that Sterling was facing 10 to 15 years in a federal prison, and that they were literally going to lose absolutely everything they had ever owned. She cried out my name, desperately pleading for sisterly mercy, swearing that she was deeply, horribly sorry for what she had done to my boy. I stood perfectly still, my arms casually crossed over my chest, looking down at the pathetic, ruined creature who had intentionally tried to destroy my child's entire future for a piece of commercial real estate. I felt absolutely nothing. No pity, no sadness, just a profound, peaceful emptiness. You were fully prepared to throw your own innocent nephew directly to the wolves just to save your expensive makeup, I replied, my voice incredibly soft, but as lethally sharp as a hunting knife. Now, you need to go learn how to live with them. I stepped back inside the warm hallway, firmly grasped the handle, and slammed the heavy wooden door shut right in her sobbing face. I turned the heavy metal deadbolt, locking her out of my life, and my son's life, forever. The massive, multi-million-dollar legal settlement we eventually received from the school district and the police department was completely life-changing. We packed up all of our belongings and permanently moved out of that toxic, judgmental neighborhood. I purchased a beautiful, spacious home out in a quiet, deeply peaceful rural county. Best of all, I used a large portion of the settlement funds to build Leo a massive, state-of-the-art automotive garage right on our new property. It is his ultimate sanctuary, a place filled with shiny tools, loud music, and pure joy. A completely safe haven where incredibly evil, toxic people who simply happen to share our bloodline will never, ever be allowed to step foot. Thank you so incredibly much, from the absolute bottom of my heart, for tuning in and listening to my story today. I would absolutely love to know where in the world you are listening from, so please drop your city or country in the comments below. If you found today's dramatic journey captivating, please kindly support our channel by joining our Patreon community. You will get instant access to our absolute best, highly exclusive true stories that are simply too intense to publish publicly on YouTube. You can easily scan the QR code right on your screen, or just click the Patreon link provided in the video description or the pinned comment. Thank you again, and stay safe out there.